Welcome to the Chorosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz. This is episode 43, The Tools of Our Time, with Troy Robertson, who is the founder of Chor Amor, as well as a choral director, of course. But you might have heard of Chor Amor in the recent months during the pandemic as this kind of almost like a choral wiki, but with prettier website and more organization of all these contributing authors, essentially, who have come up with new and different ways to deliver choral music content, whether it be online tools, online databases, just all kinds of things, and then even ideas into a hybrid environment, an online environment, the types of things that the choir of the future is probably going to need to know. We might look back 15 years from now and look at Troy and Chor Amor as being one of the catalysts of bringing our profession into the 21st century fully and starting to rethink how it is that we deliver our instruction. So I wanted to talk to Troy about where this idea came from, kind of the inspiration behind it, the philosophy behind it. And we dive into some of that story, but we also dive into some of the applications for how this might affect our profession in the future and all of the things that we are currently dealing with, how they might affect our profession in the future as well. So part of this might come across as just one big commercial for Troy and Chor Amor, which if that's how it comes across, then I'm sorry, not sorry. I think it's an awesome idea. And I think more people should know about it, which is why I'm bringing it to your attention and let you hear that story. And hopefully you can become involved in Chor Amor. Before we get to Troy, though, I want to shout out the sponsors of this show. As always, I am super excited to have on board as the school year starts, SightReadingFactory.com, which I just spent the day setting up my assignments for the first couple of weeks in Sight Reading Factory. It took me all of 15 minutes because of how awesome it is, where once you build one assignment, if you want most of the choirs to look like that you teach or that you kids that you work with, then I'm copy, paste, and I can distribute it around to the different classes on my Sight Reading Factory teacher dashboard. And I am all set up for the next couple of weeks. Our kids come in or start virtually in some hybrid. We have a weird situation. You'll hear about that later. But they're going to start on Tuesday, and I'm just good to go for the first couple of weeks with my Sight Reading Factory exercises. So make sure you get yours signed up as well, too, your teacher membership, plus all of your students a membership. And then you just plug in Chorosophy at checkout, and you'll get 10% off the whole order, which is something you can do every single time you order and renew from Sight Reading Factory each year. Of course, it's also going to be time to sing soon. There are lots of choirs that are singing at some point this year, either in person or through some type of virtual choir format because your students are online. In my opinion, there is no better place to go and get online sheet music right now than ryanmain.com and graphitepublishing.com. Both of those websites are affiliates here on the show. You can use the Chorosophy discount code to get 10% off. Let me tell you a little bit about Graphite for those of you who've never played with their website. They're a website that has a ton of different composers Just excellent resource there on Graphite, where you're going to find composers like Tim Takash, Jocelyn Hagan, Eric Barnum, many more on there. And you can download and have the music right now, which is a very similar thing. Ryan Main's website is a little bit different. He kind of does his own thing. He's a self-published, independent composer. And as all of you guys know, the whole purchasing of sheet music movement and world got shut down for several months. So head back over there as your school year is winding back up and use that Chorosophy discount code to grab some sheet music from these folks, because they have been patiently waiting for your choirs to come back. And we want to show them that we appreciate them by making some purchases over there. Of course, we also have mymusicfolders.com. That is a sponsor of the show, where you can get the Resonance Singer's Mask, as well as all types of choir paraphernalia. You can get your folders, of course. You can get choir robes. You can get anything that you can imagine in terms of infrastructure for your choir classroom and equipment. They've got that. And you can use, again, that Chorosophy checkout code. Last but not least, we have Voce Vista Video, which is a software program where students can see the way their sound waves look, including all the overtones in their sound wave. It's a revolutionary product. I encourage you to go to vocevista.com/Chorosophy, and you can download and play with the software for free for 30 days. If you decide that it has uses in your classroom, then you can go ahead and purchase it and use also the Chorosophy code and get 10% off there as well. Now, I bring you Troy Robertson and his revolutionary idea, Chor Amor. All right, I'm here with Troy Robertson. Troy, of course, is a choral director extraordinaire in his own right, but I asked him on today to talk about a project that I know is near and dear to his heart, which is called Chor Amor. I've been seeing it all over the Facebook machine and wondering what is this thing that seems to be having everybody so excited. And I've seen all kinds of people. In fact, Emmy Birch is a friend of mine in the show, and she's talking about how great this is. Everybody is buzzing about Chor Amor. So I want you to tell us a little bit about that, but also I want you to start out, Troy, by telling us about you. So welcome to the show. Who is Troy Robertson?
Thanks. Well, I'm a little older now, so it could be a long story, but I'll try to make it
That's
very
okay.
short. I'm from Georgia. I went to school there all however many years, and went through Judy Spears choral program in Georgia, one of the very best teachers I know, and did all the usual choral nerd stuff. All state, and there's a summer program there in Georgia that I did as well, and then from there to Furman University in South Carolina. From there, I went to Greensboro, University of North Carolina at Greensboro, with Richard Cox and Bill Carroll and Bill Young, and then went to teach in Gastonia, North Carolina, for 5 or 6 years. Taught high school and had a church job, and worked with the Charlotte Oratorio Singers with Scott Jarrett, and then from there went to Florida State for a few years, and then up to Ithaca, New York for a year, where I pretended to be Janet Galvan. And then after that position was looking very heavy on the music ed side, which is I wanted to be more. I basically wanted to do what I did as a high school teacher, except with college with college students.
Okay.
And so that's what I have now. I have 4 different choirs at Tarleton in Stephenville, Texas, which is kind of near the DFW area, but it's pretty rural. Um, I think we have 14,000 this fall, so kind of a mid-sized regional institution. I have 4 choirs: men's choir, women's choir, treble, tenor bass, chamber choir kind of thing. Big symphonic chorus that gets up 80, 100, 120, however many, depending on the year. And then I have a small pop a cappella group, which actually this fall is going to be a little bigger, because I'm just kind of saying to them, whatever, we're going to do kind of studio style recording, and so that doesn't mean anything in terms of how many of you fit in the room or balance or stuff like that. We can figure that out once we determine who wants to be in it. So
Right. Absolutely. So before we go on then past that in your school situation, tell us a little bit about what school will look like for you.
yeah, well, we're actually in our second full week. We're in, I guess, class day number 8 tomorrow, and Tarleton is doing a lot of um, communicating procedures, that kind of thing, because we're in a hybrid scenario where students can be online, or they can be in the classroom face to face. But the students also can choose day to day if they want to be online or face to face, since that makes it a little challenging.
Yeah.
um, I have I'm lucky in that I'm the director of choirs, and I don't have a colleague. I mean, I would love to have a colleague, but but I don't. And so I get to make the call as to kind of how things go with the ensembles. I was really left to my own devices, and that's been good. I took some guesses as to what things would look like, and so far that has been correct. We are, I think, just as you are, where you're situated, at an inflection point where something is probably going to happen or not in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll just all sit and wait and see if anything happens, if anything happens or not. If nothing happens and we stay exactly like we are for the fall, it's been going pretty well. It was a very tough adjustment for the first few days, but since then it's been going well. My students have really hung in there well, and adjusted to all these new procedures, and gosh, just all kinds of new things. So.
So so you said students can be choosing kind of from a day-to-day basis online and or not or in person. Does that are there any in-person ensemble opportunities where that would have singers one day or not? Or is it just, are you doing all of these smaller studio projects?
No, it definitely affects it. So I have, I think at this point, only 2 students out of 45 or 50 majors who have decided to do online only. One of them is in Dallas, and then one of them, which is about an hour and 40 minutes away, and then one of them is at home, but has, I think, at-risk folks at home, and made themselves be at risk. So just two that are Zoom only, but then the rest have been good about being in class, and they know that if they don't come to class, that there are a set of expectations for Zoom that would mean it's not as if they're going to just kind of get off the hook. There's things that they
Right.
have to do. They have to submit videos, camera on, sound on if I ask. Like there's some pretty because and then that's for evaluation purposes, for the sake of if I ask a question. There are all kinds of things
Hmm.
that make sure that they do have a meaningful experience. Although you and I both know that you can't do anything like what you do in person
Right.
on Zoom. So it is different, and so far it has not been disruptive, um, any more than things already have been disrupted because the attendance, things like that, take more time. It's all a little slower, a little quieter. It's been very happy, but it is all a little slower already, and so that doesn't add a lot so far. We'll
Right.
see as it goes on.
So if you're having a rehearsal and a student is online, are they watching the rehearsal live as well, or do they just do makeup work?
They're watching the rehearsal live. They're engaged with us because
Yep.
I do stop and ask questions. I am finding it hard to stick to the 30 minutes of singing suggestion by, I don't know who even gave that suggestion,
The,
but whichever authority it
the
was.
big study.
That's right, the study. Okay, which I've been trying to adhere to that, but as you can imagine, it's hard. I mean, and these are college students, so they come in boisterous and excited. I don't teach any grad students, so these are all undergrads, and they're all thrilled to see each other and be in the same room. And so it's hard to enforce the singing and talking for 30 minutes at a time rule. It's pretty relaxed in that way. Um, but we're having to turn in a seating chart with attendance so that we can do some test and trace kind of stuff. So
Right.
anyway, a lot of adjustments.
Yeah, sounds very similar to how we'll be set up when we get our kids back. Undetermined exactly when that's going to happen. But what's interesting in my position is that we have at a high school level, we have curricular and extracurricular groups on campus. Our our extracurricular groups, they get to come back in person because they're treating us just like sports. And
Hmm.
the sports are on campus, so we get to get started. And that so for us, that's kind of our elite groups. So they get to come on campus, but the curricular groups will start out virtual and then we'll gradually bring them back. But once we do bring everybody back, we're going to do what you're doing, which is, kids got the sniffles and they're afraid to spread something to somebody, so they stay home, but then they can jump on a live stream
Hmm.
of the rehearsal and keep up. So yeah, it's going to be totally different than anything we're used to. But um,
Yeah,
I'm just excited to see them again. I definitely
I
am.
have felt the same way. It
Yeah,
was great to be back.
absolutely. All right, so let's talk about this. I kind of want to hear the story if you're okay sharing of
Yeah.
the pandemic starts, choir shuts down, all this stuff is going on. When in that process did this Cor Amor start to bubble up in your brain with this project that you're putting together?
Well, the I think I had the same initial reaction many people did, which is that we came home after spring, or came home for spring break. I went to actually Southwestern ACDA, and then we got back, and we were supposed to have a concert in 3 days, and of course that didn't happen. And we were left kind of just shrugging our shoulders, like, well, I mean, I don't know if you remember, it was supposed to be 2 weeks, and
Oh
then
yeah.
I don't think anybody really believed that it was supposed to be a month, and then it's been it's a year, 2 years. So March the 183rd, I think I saw
84
somebody say today.
years.
Yes, exactly. But there came a point at which I was talking to a dear friend of mine who I think Tesfa Wanamanayu, and we were just talking about what is this going to look like, and we were talking about how folks were looking at distance and online hybrid techniques,
Hmm.
and that I felt that they were being really unrealistic because I had seen this figure going around that if you wanted to make a virtual choir, it would take 80 or 100 hours. And I had done enough recording to know that that figure was absurd. I mean, just not even close to correct. And so I don't know where that came from exactly. I think people may have just been repeating sort of what the conventional wisdom was. But I realized that couldn't be correct for somebody with some training because I'm just an amateur. I have no particular expertise. But I played around with recording, and so I thought, well, let me try it and see how it goes. And so I did one with my kids. Sure enough, I think I spent 6 or 7 hours on it total. And then I was like, and I didn't do much with the video because I didn't have Final Cut or any kind of video editing. And then I said, well, let me do a video project with just me, because I've seen these people do these 4-part projects online, and I'll see how it goes. And I didn't get very far because I recorded 4 parts with a click track and mixed them down and made a video in 10 or 12 minutes. And I was like, well, okay, just extrapolate that out. Like, if that's how long that took me, it doesn't take 80 hours. This is not real. So I have since made probably a dozen, not that many, but probably a dozen virtual choir videos, and I just realized what we really need is somebody to say, hey, you don't have to be scared. This just takes a little bit of practice and some know-how and some step by step, and then we can use these techniques to secure ourselves against the worst case scenario.
Mhm.
That not that it's going to replace choir or be even close to what choir is. None of us really, none of us want this in any way, shape, or form. But it is something that could still be good for student learning outcomes. You could kind of keep some sense of community going. You can still sing and make some music. I mean, there are many positive aspects to using these techniques, even though, in terms of just virtual choir, per se, we may abandon it immediately as soon as we can go back face to face. There are many parts of it that we can use in the interim, and I would say there are also many things that I've learned along the way that I for sure will be using when we go back together face to face. Many things that are going to come in really handy. So that was kind of the initial idea, and then I just started calling friends of mine from all over the country, like, hey. Could you offer to like be part of this in some way, shape, or form? Because the other component of it was we would sort of all help train other people and help to sort of disseminate this information. And then once the school year started cranking up, we would begin sharing material. Now, I have learned a lot since these initial steps about what this looks like, and more realistically what happens. But that was the initial idea, and I would say in some ways, even though I was wrong about maybe some of the execution things or what it might look like in the end, it's been a big success because we've got a lot of material out there that's being shared, and singers, I know singers and teachers are finding some hope and comfort and training and so on and so forth in this project. And so that was kind of the initial idea, and then of course we could talk about how it's progressed, but that's probably not very interesting because a lot of that is just things that worked, things that didn't work, and then that brought us to where we are now.
Well, what interests me in particular is I actually didn't realize that it had simply started from you doing your own virtual choir and then realizing that you could kind of share out some of what you learned and all that, and just kind of growing from there. Because I think I started noticing it after it had become a little bit more developed. But what I'm particularly interested in is when I'm looking at your website for this, it almost seems to me like it has the makings of like a miniature professional organization, like a membership organization kind of a thing, where
Well,
even if like, and so I wonder if what your thoughts are about this, because I'm sure it has to have popped into your brain. What happens when people don't need these online tools as much as they do now? What does Cor Amor then do for us?
well, it's funny you say that because you can become a member for free. You just sign
Right.
up for the newsletter, and then that's your membership benefit. You get the newsletter once a month. But no, the idea beyond this is that it will either become irrelevant, which would be fine, or I do have some things that I wanted to do before this all went down. There were a couple. The name actually came from a previous idea I had, which was trying to guide people towards solid repertoire. I don't know about you, but I find myself frustrated with a lot of the repertoire resources out there. They tend to want to show us everything instead of the best things. And so, my thought was that if you give me the 10 best pieces by X composer, that's probably all the pieces I need by that composer for a year or two. And so I'd rather have sort of a listing of here are the best pieces for X purpose. And so that was the original idea behind the name, and I actually had friends help me with that. Do you keep a repertoire database of your own?
When you say repertoire database, you mean things that I haven't done yet, but someday would like to do, and I can look them up by composer and all of that. Is that what you mean?
Yes, and then I in my own, I include more details, so voicing and season and secular or sacred and how much do I like it?
So
That sort of thing.
I will reveal that no, I don't, because I am not that organized. And I tend to just live my entire life by the seat of my pants, and that is not a joke. But for me, it's just all up here. I've for repertoire for me, oftentimes, whether I'm programming for my high school age kids or for the adult pros that I get to work with it's just totally different. The grown-ups, we're usually doing themed programs where we have a time period we're attacking, or a composer or a
Mhm.
concept. Whereas with the high school kids, I'm more focused on pedagogical elements that I need to hit with them. And
Yeah.
does this piece check those boxes or not? That kind of thing. And I'm fortunate also at the high school to have a gigantic music library. It's like a 110-year
Mhm.
old high school choir program. So there's tons and tons of music.
Wow.
And so I have so usually what I just do is I just walk around the library and become inspired like that.
Yeah.
That's or throw away, or as I'm in there, throw away old racist things.
Yeah, that's a big part of my job as well, as
Yeah.
I find if a box is brown, I'm like, "Well, this is probably terrible." Just throw it away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's great. So you're is there a so it sounds like what you're saying is that there is an opportunity through the initial. Oh, there goes my dog.
That's okay. You may hear thunder here, we're having quite the storm,
Yeah.
so
She's been going crazy tonight. She's normally pretty good while I record. I'm gonna
wow,
let
she
her.
is upset.
Yeah.
What kind of dog do you have?
She's a Australian Sheephound mix, but I think that noise just means that there is a dog outside.
Ah,
Okay. All right. So it sounds like what your the original kind of expansion from the virtual choir and online, I guess, online teaching tools that Cora Moore was, and you've got this idea from before with repertoire, tips and tricks, and how to keep a database and all that. It sounds like I'm just super excited about the concept, because one of the things that I also have been, I guess you could say, frustrated with over the years is that the older I get, um, the less I tend to get out of the traditional convention format,
mm,
if that makes sense. Just because if you think about it, and I don't, this is not a knock on an organization. This is just the convention itself, like the model of a convention.
yeah,
They have to program for the where the bulk of the need is. And so you end up seeing a lot of sessions that are really kind of geared for maybe a conductor who has never programmed before. And so it is, and I see partly what your frustration, which is you get these gigantic packets in in a reading session, and maybe it's not very focused. And part of that are probably, in my mind, is limited by the physical presence of having to be there with a pre-printed packet, and you've got to plan it way ahead. But what's exciting about the Cora More concept to me is that since it's online based, you can be really nimble with what you put together for people. And as people are putting together resources and sharing them, it's just that it's like a on demand. You're like the Netflix of choir conventions.
yeah. Well, and I think that we've had underutilized resources in archiving because a lot of folks are trying to um, guard their membership and guard the fees that they're generating, things like that. Whereas in my case, I'm not. There's nothing to monetize. I'm just trying to share, and I also view the things that we've done as emergency measures. I mean,
Yes.
I really suspect that the worst is yet to come in some ways in terms of uh, the the effects of what's happening right now, not necessarily the things that are happening right this minute, but that we are bound for some hard times economically, and
Mhm.
whenever that happens, choir tends to take a hit. And I remember Eve Ely. I saw him speak one time, and he said that I can't remember what he said was expensive. He said something expensive, but he said air is free, and I remember him saying that because it reminded me that all we really need to sing is air, and so we can get through this together on very little money in a way that really hasn't been possible before. I mean, the copyright sort of line that keeps moving forward through the years is now well into the 20th century. And so a lot of this repertoire is free. Many of the things that we need to record and to share are already in people's pockets. There's just all kinds of great things that we can do just by sharing, not so much by guarding what it is we're doing. It's a different world.
Right. I agree with that entirely. My only concern is that, and here's one of the things that I think about just that topic in general. I agree with you that there are a lot of things that are, we haven't even scratched the surface of the pain we're going to feel economically.
Hmm.
There is a certain naivete out there about how how bad it could potentially be. Um,
Yeah.
but but um, a lot of the things that we can do currently, I think about it this way, is that my students, my advanced students, for example, could quite easily jump in and do a virtual choir at
Hmm.
the high school level because they've got the tools. But I wonder the how different it would be if they had been learning choir online for 4 years instead of, and then we're told to jump in and try that. And so I feel like, yes, you're right, we have to develop these tools and become flexible so that in the worst case scenario we can pivot, which is a word everyone hates right now, but we can pivot into these areas. I'm totally with you there. But I do think that even if we have to make our classroom environments in person look all kinds of weird ways and safety ways and all this different kind of stuff, that hearing them in the room, and this is coming across like I'm disagreeing with you. I'm actually not, because you said this earlier before. We can't replace choir
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this. And so what I get excited about the Cora Moore concept is I'm looking like a year down the road when hopefully it is safe enough for everybody to be back in person again with their rehearsals.
Hmm.
Their budgets will be cut, which you're right, that's going to happen. We get people back in person, and then what can these technology tools that people like you guys are developing do to enhance the education of those kids when they're back in person, so that we can continue to make this art form forever? Because I think
Yes.
it's almost like any industry that goes through major change has to invent new tools to survive.
Mhm.
That's what I see you guys doing.
Yeah. Well, and just to be clear about a couple things. One is I was really referring more to the idea of the convention
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
professional development and sharing in that way. I think that we are a solid 10 years behind or so in terms of how we as teachers share with each other. It's so easy. We are all so busy. And I remember, as a high school teacher, I remember just feeling like when I was in my building, I was isolated in a sense because we were down in another wing, and you just put your head down and you go from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 p.m. and you don't see anybody and everybody else is already gone. And so it was isolating. And so I feel like many people are use social media pretty well, but they don't necessarily use all of the other elements of the internet very well to share with each other. And so that's my hope, is that for the teachers, this will be a way to move forward just a little bit. In terms of the classroom itself, I don't actually know how much we've added to what was already there. To my mind, this is more just, it's kind of pushing us a little further in the direction of new tools for assessment, pushing us a little further in terms of our ability to bring the world our students live in a little more into the classroom. I don't. We could have a long philosophical talk, I'm sure, about pop music and how it's created and how that affects our students' ears and so on and so forth, and our audience's ears. I mean, there's so much there to talk about, but I do think that if we're not scared of that, that these tools that we have can begin to help move us a little further out to reach students and bring them into that personal experience of being in the room together, singing. Um, and so there are some things like assessment, things like that, the techniques I just mentioned. There are some elements that I think speak to what you were just saying, which is that they will hopefully be that first kind of taste of something interesting about choir, in addition to all of the other things that we already were offering. Because I don't know about you, I talk to my students all the time about what was it that got them interested. For most of them, it was the teacher. Most of them connected with the teacher. That was certainly the case for me. But it was also the challenge. I really did not feel challenged in a lot of my other ninth grade classes. Ninth grade was kind of a weird time, as I'm sure it is for many people. But that, my teacher saying to me, because I was illiterate at that time, and so she said, "You can do this, and we're going to learn how to sight read in this week." And I knew nothing, just did not know what the little dots on the page meant. And she took us from being totally illiterate to really being pretty good in a couple weeks. Um, and so that process to me was exhilarating, and that's just an example of one of the things that's always been there. And now hopefully we're gonna add some additional tools.
Yeah, and I see that too as I'm digging around through the site and I'm looking at your resources page, and I would say though that you're don't sell yourself short. I think you are adding to what's in the classroom too. And here's what I mean by that. I think that as some of these budget things hit us and as some of these economic things hit us, school districts and colleges and everything all over the country are going to look for, just like any industry would have to. And I know educators, we don't like to think of ourselves as part of an industry, but we are,
Mhm.
that has a lot of the same realities as others, is they're going to start to look for ways to be just as good, but more efficiently.
Mhm.
And so, for example, if I've got a database that I can go to with uh, ways to build some online tools, or uh, if I didn't know how to edit music that kids turned in online, even if I'm still in a place where I'm getting to see students in person, I can see a future where a school district decides they really like the hybrid model for their high school. And they like
Mhm.
the fact that they can hire one teacher to teach 180 students instead of
Mhm.
120 because they're only coming in 2 days a week, and they're going to do online stuff the other days, and they're going to have all this. We're going to be automating things. That's just my opinion. I can't prove it because it's the future, but I do see that. And so what I see here is ways that teachers can continue to be efficient with their time. And so, for example, we're going to be experimenting with that in my school, where we're going to come back probably hybrid when the kids come back.
Mhm.
And so I looked at it this way, kind of like what I see a lot of some of the things that some of your folks have put together, is that what can I, if, for example, if I've got the kids only half the time in person, how precious does that time become? At which point, anything else that I can move to an online format, I'm going to move it to an online format so that I can maximize that time with those kids in the room. Well, but if I'm a teacher that's not been brought up doing a lot of stuff with virtual tools, then I might need a Cor Amor type resource to go and say, I just need to dive into this particular way to build some resources, or do an assessment that I normally would have done in the classroom, but now I'm going to do it online. Those types of things, as a way to preserve as much precious singing time as we can.
Yeah, well, and even I mean, even leaving aside the notion that we might need to save time for because of the pandemic or something like that. You're probably familiar with the concept of a flipped classroom. To me, a lot of this stuff kind of fits into that mold of let's put all the material and the homework online, and you can go and spend time with it. And in many ways, this is what I did as a ninth grader in Georgia. We had practice tracks for our all-state stuff. We didn't spend a lot of time with our teacher working on All-State, and All-State in Georgia was complicated. I mean, we had 3 sight reading examples, and we had tonal memory, and we had 3 different scale forms, and there's all kinds of. We had to sing an art song, and all of that was done outside of the class with mostly with just tapes. This was how long ago it was. And so that concept has been there, but I think now the thing is it's just easier than ever because instead of having to like make tapes for every kid and play the piano, now you've got your MP3, you throw it in your shared folder, and the students have that to be able to practice. And then there's an incredible array of software for them also to be able to practice music theory skills, oral skills, all kinds of things that they can now do on their own. Now, of course, that's highly motivated kids, but I think in many ways the highly motivated kids are there are low hanging fruit. They're the ones who don't get reached as often in the high school. Um, you said something else I was going to build off of, but we kind of went a little further along,
It's
so
okay.
maybe we'll come back to it.
Yeah, it's okay. So tell me about about the structure of all the inputs then into this group that you've put together. I see on the website that there are advisors. What does it mean to be an advisor?
That was a term we kind of agonized over because we didn't want it to sound intimidating, but we also didn't want it to sound meaningless. I mean, we kind of wanted it to have the meaning of what it was, which is exactly what it says. And it really is it falls a little short of the mark because those are our contributors, and so that's folks who early on it was mostly folks who just agreed to be part of the process.
Uh-huh.
So I would say the first 40 or so people I talked to, I mean, 98% of them said, yes, sure, that sounds awesome. I'll help you. And then as it's gone on, that's one of the things that has adjusted just a little bit, which is if somebody wants to be an advisor, I'm like, okay, let's have a phone call. And let me talk to you about the kinds of things that you can do to help. And so anybody who said they want to be an advisor, there's no set of qualifications. It's just, would you like to be an advisor? What would you like to do? Here are some things that we're up to. And maybe this will be an outlet for you creatively or as a teacher, or you can just share what you're already doing. There's all kinds of paths for that.
That's awesome. And so people have their own things that they can bring to the table. They don't have to, they're not all necessarily choir tech wizards.
Oh gosh, no, no, no. I mean, one of our foremost tech wizards started working with all this technology in May. Laura Sam is just super smart and motivated, and she's a retired teacher who's now going like gangbusters on this stuff. I don't know how much of a tech person she was before this, but I get the impression not much. I mean, email and stuff like that. But she enjoys it, and she's learned quickly. It takes just a little bit of practice. My first virtual choir was my students. My second virtual choir was for the National ACDA Leadership Conference. So it's something where you can make some quick progress just with a little bit of practice. So no, most people are relative novices.
Right. Yeah, I see you've got some interest in advocacy as well. Of course, that's one of my passions. I've done several episodes on that on this show. How do you see the role for a group like this in the advocacy realm, especially now?
I think early on there was a little bit of silence out there that was a little scary about what was going to happen this fall, and I'm sure folks were waiting to see because even now we're not. I mean, I'm uncertain about what's going to happen in the next month. I don't know about you, but I don't feel like I know what's going to happen at my school, and so we were anxious about that because that was when the choir, and was it Washington State, I think, that had the major outbreak in the rehearsal. Is that right?
Oh, the Skagit Valley Chorale, and you're talking about,
Was that Washington? Is that
it
right?
was in Washington, yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So anyway, so that was about around when that happened, and people were getting all panicky. And gosh, singing is terrible, and so it was a time when we were anxious about that. And when I say we, I mean some of the folks who'd already kind of signed on. And so I needed to write a memo to my provost. I felt, and I wanted to get my whole faculty on board. One of my colleagues a friend of mine needed to write a letter to his board and say, hey, I can still do my job. We have lots of options. And then I just saw that there were people out there in the world, choir directors of all stripes, who were feeling like they didn't know what to say. And so the advocacy part of the website came out of that, but it was relatively short-lived. I mean, we haven't done much with it since, I guess that was back in maybe May, when I really felt a strong urge to make some statements to my neck of the woods about what we can and can't do. So that's still there. I know we have a number of our membership who feel passionately about it and are engaged in it in their own corner of the world, but it hasn't necessarily been first and foremost on the website or with Chor Amor in the last, I would say, 2 or 3 months.
Right. And I can see where there would be a time, or there definitely was a time, and I agree that everybody just kind of pumped the brakes on even guessing what the fall was going to be like. And then from my perspective, then we moved into a period of I'm not confident enough to say what's going on to my own bosses about what should
Okay.
be happening. And then of course we made a joke earlier about what is that study called, right? And it's just called The Study. But of course, in the choir world, we've had two major scientific moments in the choir world. One is called The Webinar, and then the other is called The Study. And that's really,
And apparently we're one of the only fields who's having this kind of discussion.
well, yes, we are the only one that I know of that's having it in the way that we are. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
We're unique in that we, I mean, my audience is,
Well, let me say what I mean by that.
yeah,
My wife is a psychologist.
yeah.
So the level of engagement with this subject at a time when it's endangering your livelihood is not the same in every field. And so you can imagine psychologists who have to spend a lot of time in small rooms with people. Uh, this is a major concern for them, but they don't have the same level of interest as a profession, as a sort of on a unified front. They don't have a scientific study that they've paid for. It's interesting how go get 'em, band and choir have been. I think it actually kinda speaks well of us how how much we've charged into this, even though there have been some bad moments.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What I mean, my audience has heard me say this a million times, but my perception of it is that we're unique in the fact that we started framing the risk as binary,
Yeah,
and that
that's a human thing right there.
well, it is, except not really with diseases. So, like, we don't think of with other diseases that way. We don't think of, I will either be totally fine or someone will die. Like, there's something,
Yeah,
there's an in between.
sure.
And what's interesting too, because with the pandemic and how we've approached it as a profession, I think some of that has led to some really, like you said, it speaks well of us because it's led to some really important information being brought forward. And we have the study and we have all of the stuff that comes from that. As long as we, well, I'll give an example. You use psychologists as an example. I have a friend who's a dentist, and they say that being a dentist is actually like one of the highest risk professions,
Yeah, yeah.
because you quite literally cause someone to aerosolize when you are blowing, stuff
The
into their
little thing
mouth.
that they stick in your mouth,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And they've got to get right up in your face, and it's
Mhm,
30 minutes, or with the hygienist, and they're right up in your face for that whole time. And
yeah,
but what was unique, of course, for them in that situation, their profession said, this is a very dangerous profession. But they didn't say let's cancel it. They said, what do we do to make it safer?
yeah.
That
Well,
that
that there is a difference, they're uncancelable.
was
We need
right,
dentists.
right. I understand. I understand.
Yeah.
But they were can. I mean, most dentists were considered non-essential during the lockdowns, and they
Oh,
came
okay.
back after a certain period of time, um, and they came back with new HVAC systems, and they came back with HEPA filters on the floor, and they came back with
Mm,
shields that they could look through at the patient, and just all these things. And that was kind of my thing
mhm.
from the very beginning. It was like, I want us to be safe too, but let's have our first thought be, how do we make it safer? Like,
Yeah,
what are the stuff
right.
we do? And but I also like, and that's kind of why I asked you to come on, is I also like the idea that we have to become flexible and grow and new in the way we deliver our information. I always just saw it as both. Like, we need to do both.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and this a lot of people did ask me that question, like, "Do you really think this is this big of a problem, or don't you think this?" Oh, I remember now. So let's go back to this in just a second. You were talking about the new ways in which we can serve students more broadly, and so let's come back to that in just one second. But early on, folks were asking me, "Is this really this big of a risk? What is this going to endanger the profession by creating a new outlet for administrators to cut whatever?" And my response was that, it's not that it's a huge risk, but if it's a 1% risk that we're not face to face, and lo and behold, many of us are not, then we need some way to deliver this. And I'm off on summer break, and I haven't been doing anything since the middle of March. And it's like, I can either get ready and really work hard and have a great time. By the way, I actually had a wonderful time connecting with all my different colleagues and meeting all kinds of new people. Um, and it was kind of labor of love, truly. But if if it's that small of a risk, but it's an existential risk, then it's worth investing the money in trying to, or the time rather, in trying to figure it out. And so that was my calculation. It was I think the same idea you have, which is that it's not binary. It's a chance. But my thing was, okay, well, if it's a small chance, let's expand that and make sure that we've got our bases covered, and then we're ready for anything.
right. Yeah, and I actually completely agree with you on that. I did a short episode around that time, expressing my frustration with what I saw was an embracing of these online tools in a way that could be detrimental to us when budgets are crunched later.
Mm,
But um, what I was reacting to was not your mindset that you just described, because I agreed with that. In fact, I said it in that little episode. I was like, yes, we want to develop all the tools, because
mhm.
if we can only teach online, we need to do it really well.
Yeah, we gotta have it, yeah.
We've got to do it really well. But I said there has to be some nuance with how we talk to our bosses about it. Like
Mhm.
we we have to say, like every time, you got to lead the conversation with, I can do this, principal, boss person, or whatever. I can do this, but you just need to remember that this is not what we do. Like we
Yep,
have to get them back in the classroom to do what we do. That's what keeps them coming back. That's where lives are changed. It's that human to human, body next to body. Well, body farther away from the body now, but they're still
sure.
nearby. And because what I saw was what could have been, I think, well-meaning, but what could
Mhm.
have been an overzealous presentation of how amazing these online tools were going to be, to the
Mhm.
point where I'm putting myself in a mindset of a principal or a head of a college that is feeling super stressed out about money.
Yeah,
And I see my staff bragging to the whole town about how amazing their new music curriculum that's now all online. And then I
mhm.
noticed that they could do that for twice the students. And
Right.
why would I need to hire as many professors? And so my beef was not with the creation of the tools, because the creation of the
Mhm.
tools is really important. It's messaging. It's in
Yep.
how do we message that? How do we communicate that so that our bosses continue to see what we do in the classroom as being critical, not cuttable,
Mhm.
not not something that when the budget's cut gets tight, that we can just easily do. Oh, because he's already got that online thing figured out. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and this goes back to the point I was gonna make earlier, which is this was a conversation we had, of course, with friends and family and everybody else, which was, exactly the concern you just expressed. And my own feeling is that I have had very good fortune in my bosses, and I know that there are bosses out there because I have family members who've worked with them in other school systems, who don't operate in good faith. They are there to make sure that they please the next boss up the line because that's their goal is to make that next step up the line, not to help children, not to help students. Um, and so my own thought is, well, those kind of folks are always looking for the excuse. And, I'm not going to provide them with that excuse. They're going to find it. Whatever it
Mhm.
is that they need, they're going to find that excuse. And so this won't be it. But on the other side of the coin, and this goes back to what you were saying, 10 minutes ago or so. Let's take Texas, for example, where many of these small towns have, first grade through 12th grade all in the same school, and they haven't had a band or a choir program in a couple years, or maybe not in a long time. And when they did, it was one teacher who taught both, and then taught English for the other 2 or 3 periods a day.
Right.
And so in that kind of a scenario where you have kids who are spread out, and by the way, one of my mentors wants to do this very thing. They're looking at West Texas and South Texas, where there are these historic programs, but they're mostly gone. They've mostly all gone away. And so, how could we serve such a large landmass and the thousands of children there who are not receiving music education?
Hmm.
How could we serve them? And so, this could be a way to do that. Now, that requires legislators and administrators who are acting in good faith and want what's best for kids and are willing to devote a little bit of resources, because it's not nothing. I mean, you still have to pay some portion of their of salary and some resources to get things off the ground, but it could be a way to serve those students who otherwise just wouldn't be served at all. And
Yeah.
so when the kind of like you were talking about, it's not a binary. It's just like, can we take this from 0% to 60%? In person would be best, but if we can't get to 100%, can we get it to 60% and give these children something?
Right.
And I think that would be an amazing application of this, which is way beyond my control, but it would be an incredible thing to happen.
Right. Well, and I would say that with the project that you guys are doing, that you're moving us closer to having something like that available. to when some good faith administrators see that potential, they would have the opportunity to. And I think that, but beyond just Cor Amor and your group that you've kind of got going, the choral profession largely, as we've had to develop these tools, we will take a step forward towards that. I think it'll just happen naturally. But I completely support what you're doing. It's awesome, and I think it's really important that people know about it, so that they can participate, hopefully, but then also learn from what you guys are doing. And I know I hear from teachers a lot through the show, and that are just so stressed out about all the possibilities that might get thrown at them. And something like what you guys are doing is just amazing. I just really commend you.
Well, thank you. I really hope teachers are taking advantage. One of the things we tried to do late in the summer is to begin to develop at least a few projects that would speak to teachers who are elementary school, middle school, so that they have at least a couple ideas like how could I adapt these things to be able to reach kids right where they are. I don't know if you saw the rounds thing that we put out, and another friend of mine, Evan Powers, has composed a piece that he calls his concept loops. He's heavily involved in the pop a cappella movement, and so that would have been live formerly, not loops as in like I'm going to push a pedal down and make loops, but he just called it that because it was kind of the same concept with singing. But that lends itself very well, of course, to doing online projects because they're easy to teach, they work relatively quickly, they're in a idiom that students are already kind of familiar with, and so my hope is that teachers have at least a few ideas of how can we do some projects that build a little bit of community, challenge the students a little bit, but also begin to onboard them with all these new techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we finish up here, I wanted you to tell us a little bit about ways that, well, two things really. The easy way to get involved is simply to go fill out the form on the website. Is that
Yeah, and actually, that really is mainly just the for the newsletter. It's actually pitiful how little that gets you, but
oh,
at least then you are informed of what's going
well,
on because that's
I'm glad I asked. Then what's the
yeah.
best way to get involved?
The best way, just go to the website, start surfing around. I try to make it sort of well sequenced so that okay, I click on repertoire or click on methods rather, then that takes me to a page with different methods, ideas, repertoire, some copyright information. So hopefully it's not too much depth on the site. You kind of can see where you're going. I don't know if you've had time to bop around in there, but it's
I'm there now, man.
yeah.
I've got it
Well,
right.
I hope it's pretty clear. I
Yeah,
mean, anywhere you are on the site, you can click on the Coremore logo, go back to the beginning. I try to also include the same link on multiple pages if it's the main thing that's important. So, for example, on every one of the methods pages up at the top, there's the Coremore shared folder of all methods. And so, we're just trying to direct people to what's already been done. I would say our focus up to now has been on, training people in these techniques and then in some repertoire. Those are probably the two biggest areas of resource. We did do some performances over the summer, and I helped with 4 or 5 performances. But performance has kind of taken a back seat. We've got a couple that are in the hopper that are coming out over the next 2 or 3 weeks or months. But that performance aspect has kind of been put off now that everybody's in the thick of it.
right. So then what would you say? I've got one more core or more question so that people can get involved if they're listening and it strikes them. What would be some things, if any, that you feel like might be holes in what you are offering that somebody out there listening might be like, I can do that. Like that's something I'm good at. What
Yeah.
areas do you need in terms of help?
Well, I like what you said right there. So the biggest barrier to people getting involved so far has been they feel like they're not enough of an expert. To which my response is, well, if you're teaching music, like in your classroom, you're the expert, so you have something to share. And then the second concern a lot of folks have is they don't quite know, well, what are other people doing? I don't want to step on toes, or I don't want to duplicate somebody else's effort. To which I would say, listen, there are a lot of people out there who are really desperate for information, and they don't have the bandwidth to share much of anything right now. And so, if you do have something you can share, it is very good odds that you're going to be the only one sharing it. And so, no matter how humble you think your effort is, reach out, and we might be able to find some folks who need your assistance. And then the third thing is folks are just busy, and that is totally fine. If you want to come check it out, not fill out the membership form, but just use the website. This is supposed to be a resource, and sharing is just one of those bonus things that I hope happens all along the way, and helps more people.
Right. Well, I mean, that's just so awesome that you're doing that. And yeah, thank you again so much for doing this project. And of course, in addition to your teaching work, I mean, that's awesome. I think the things that people are doing right now to help each other in the choir world probably the best thing to have come out of the pandemic. And I'm sure you've seen that firsthand with what you're
I
doing.
fully agree. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'll try to put as many people in touch with you guys as we can through the show notes, and I'll put links and all that kind of stuff in there. Okay.
Great. Well, thanks for all the work you're doing, Chris. I really appreciate it. Love your show.
All right.
It's an honor to be on.
All right. Thank you so much. So thank you as always for sticking around to the end of an episode. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit of the backstory from Troy about Chor Amor and the really insightful move that he made early on in the pandemic to gather these resources and to get them into one place. As we discussed, as you just heard, for use now, but also probably for use forever. And I think that's if we take one excellent thing out of this horrible situation in our choir world, then that could be it, which is that we figure out better ways to deliver our content that even when we are back together, this temporary new normal becomes a new and improved normal when we can combine the best of all of the tools that we have as choral music educators and as choral musicians for sharing our content that we teach, but also sharing our performances and sharing our art form in ways that we never really had the access to before. If we decide to look at it that way, could that be our future? And I think so. And it'll be thanks a lot to the stuff that the folks over at Chor Amor are doing and Troy's idea there. So if you are not yet involved, I did discover, we didn't discuss, there is a Facebook page also. You can go and like the Facebook page for Chor Amor, but of course, go to choramor.com and you can contact them and sign up for the newsletter, but just dig around on the website. There's a lot of great stuff there. So, of course, if you are still listening at this point, that means you are probably getting something out of this content, and I appreciate that you are sticking around. So here are the things that you can do. Like, share, comment. Those are probably the biggest things that help, is to interact with the content that you see, whether it be leaving a rating in the Apple Podcast app. You can also go on the Facebook page, Choralosophy Podcast, and leave a stars rating there and some kind of a review. Any type of actual comment or review is very helpful. It helps other people see the show and come across our content as well. And then, of course, there is the Patreon, patreon.com/Choralosophy, where as little as $3 a month, you can jump on there and get a patron-only episode approximately once a month, as well as materials I create for the classroom. There's a swag level where we've got a hat and a t-shirt you can choose from there. Lots of fun stuff, and off social media conversations that can be had there, which is excellent. Then, of course, there are the sponsors of the show: Voce Vista, Sight Reading Factory, graphitepublishing.com, ryanmain.com, and mymusicfolders.com, all of which, if you get some choral needs met there, a lot of sheet music, of course, software is involved. We've got choir equipment through mymusicfolders.com, all kinds of stuff there. And any time you make a purchase at any of those vendors affiliated with the show, just plug Choralosophy in at checkout. You'll get yourself a discount. Lets them know that you are listening. It's just awesome. These are all great ways to help continue the mission of this show and to keep the conversation going, keep the conversation alive. So thanks a lot, everybody. See you next time.